If ever your life could be a true crime podcast episode, then this podcast is for you. We're about to embark on a roller coaster of emotions, insights, survival, and stories about escape. So buckle up and let the journey begin.
Good day, all. You are in the Escape Pod with us. I'm Julie here with Charity, and although not in the Escape Pod itself, a very special guest joining us for this episode. I will let Charity make the awesome introduction.
Jim Warne is a dear friend of mine. I met him through his amazing mother, who is going to be the topic of much conversation today. His mother, Bev Warne, was single-handedly the most incredible human being I've ever met. And she just passed away and left this plane in April of this year and is missed every day. But I'm so grateful that she decided to bring Jimmy along to my daughter's college graduation party, and he and I sat and drank a bunch of wine together and got to know each other. And he's just been a good collaborator and just source of friendship and information and just amazing. And he's got an amazing history himself too. Like, he's so interesting and a great conversationalist, and is just really doing some amazing things in the world. So we're really delighted to have you here with us today. We had always envisioned having an episode with your mom on to talk about some of the stories, some of the things that we really bonded over as I was getting to know her. Just humanity can be really ugly. And what your mother endured as a young Lakota person in this community is very harrowing and heartbreaking. And how she turned that into such positivity and such light, and how you have stepped into her shoes and are carrying on that education and building bridges and continuing that work is really important. And because we never did get to have this time with her, of course, you're the next best thing, and you know her stories very, very well, being a documentarian. So I would love for you, Jim, before we get going into everything, to talk about your journey and what you're doing in this stage of life to honor, and how you've honored the memory of your mother all these years.
Well, thank you so much, Charity. It's wonderful to be here with you. And I'm certainly glad that our paths crossed as a result of Mom and her impact in the community. And she would always identify the allies, our non-Indian allies that we like to say, for folks that are wanting to work with Indigenous communities in a good way. And Mom was able to find those folks and then gather them so that it became a circle of individuals that had like-minded approach to partnering and working together to provide better opportunities for Indigenous people in various communities. So it's wonderful to follow her footsteps. I always say I have size 17 shoes, but I can't even, make a mark in the footprint that she's made. But I always say collectively, our footprints together could fill what Mom was able to do. And that's exactly, I think, was her intent in gathering all of us, was to continue to work after she's made her journey. And, it's so hard not to pick up the phone and talk to her. And, I'm doing several film related things and simulcasts, and I wish she could be there with me still teaching. But as you said, as a documentarian, I do have many, many hours of her in interviews so that she can still teach through the medium of film. And it's wonderful to have those stories documented, not only for family archives, but to share, to teach others on the type of philosophies that she shared with others.
I think that's so powerful. We actually have a cultural training that our Native American board members and staff, when we first opened, or right before we first opened, put together for One Heart staff so that it's just part of the fabric. And I've been reluctant to redo that training because she's not here. So now we're trying to figure out ways that we can take the Zoom recordings of your mom, freshen up the other material, and splice her stuff into it, because I do not I want every single one of my staff members to know her. So that's part of what they're going to go through. So we're trying to figure that out so that we don't lose that, because it's just too important.
Yes, and I'm glad that you are saving those stories and those teachings for your not only current staff, but the future staff that will still have an opportunity to learn. So
Right.
I appreciate that you are doing that, not only for your staff, but I'm sure you'll share it with other organizations and individuals that want to learn some of the cultural perspectives, particularly from mom's point of view.
Right.
For sure.
Well, she's missed every day. We've had quite a week, and today was a really rough morning. And I wanted to call her. I mean, and I couldn't. Just like she would know what to do. She would put this into perspective and make it feel better. And so I really felt that gap today, if you will. So
she's
Yes,
still
yeah.
Definitely on our side, though. Her presence is definitely
Yeah, I
felt.
think
Yeah.
all of us have learned and would kind of know what she would say. And, because of the other examples of what she provided, just being able to kind of problem solve and look at things from a larger universal view in terms of how it impacts not only our community, but others. So it's a nice way to look at things that can be challenging, obviously, as you know, over the years. But with those challenges, she was able to still move forward in impacting a variety of organizations, and including One Heart and your team over there. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're continuing her memory, particularly with the community center and some of those things, so that her message can continue.
yeah, we wouldn't have it any other way.
No, not at all. So, speaking of some of the challenges, and especially challenges that our community has faced, but many other communities in our region and in other parts of the country and world, is the concept of historical trauma. So, Charity, I know you had some kind of key dates that we have talked about in time that made a real difference in how Indigenous peoples were treated. And some of those things continue to be part of the fabric of our society, and unfortunately still contribute to some of the problems that and the trauma that people feel today. It's not just a phrase; it is an active problem in our community and in other communities where historical trauma has been prevalent. Do you want to share some of just the basic facts around that topic?
Yeah, so what I thought we could do, Jim, is, we'll talk a little bit about what it is in case it is new to some of our listeners and they've heard the term, but they don't really understand what it means. And then the thing that I think brings it in focus is this little timeline of this was not that long ago. And if this were happening today to you and your people, put yourself in these shoes. And I think it gives it an entirely different narrative and meaning. And it makes people go, oh God, this is okay. So we know the history of humanity is just really ugly at times. People have been conquering other people since humanity began, for whatever reason. Empires imposing their beliefs or their values, whatever, on other people. And none of it's okay. I mean, this has been happening since the dawn of time. A lot of times people who look like one another are doing it to each other. But the thing that's so different about the Native American people and how that happened is how recent it was. And most people don't think that. They think it happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and that is just not the truth. And then the second part of it is being subjected and infiltrated, if you will, your lands, your way of life by somebody who does not look like you. And, complete foreigners, and how horrifying that must have been. And then, of course, the horrors that endured on the the ripple, the wave of that is just, they're worth speaking about. And so historical trauma, of course, is that cumulative and collective psychological and emotional injury that a group of people experiences over generations. And that can be due to an oppressive system or some type of violence or discrimination. More contemporarily, it's used prevalently in conjunction with what happened to Native Americans and what became the United States. Obviously it's not isolated to this country, but it is been proven scientifically that it is impacting the DNA of descendants. So it's not just a thing that people have to, quote, get over. It is now part of their wiring, and it is these DNA changes are induced by trauma, and I don't know that gets enough airtime. So for the Native people in our region, there's many sources of manifestations of this trauma, and one of the most profound is, of course, the loss of their ancestral land, the Black Hills, where we live. And that was taken from them by the U.S. government and white settlers in violation of a whole string of treaties. And it was, white people were coming in and raiding the natural resources, killing the livelihood and way of life of the Lakota people here. But it was also a place of spiritual significance. So imagine if people came in and just overran your churches, and tried to take that away from you. That takes the conversation to a different level. And I don't know that people look at it that way and try to find those similarities. But that quick historical context that I think maybe will help put it in perspective that this wasn't that long ago. So we'll do a brief little timeline here, and then I'd love to get your thoughts and some of those stories that your mom lived through some of this, and how it impacted her and how it shaped her and the work that she did. And now, of course, you were very heavily shaped by the work you do, by the work she did, and how you were raised, and those stories are just really powerful. So starting in 1776, of course, the United States of America was founded or hijacked or stolen, whatever, term you think best applies by the time we're done with this conversation. I remember some months ago, we had Ukrainian refugees on our campus here at One Heart. And when they graduated, I remember them thanking us for helping them when their entire world ended. And those words were so profound, and it really came to mind when we think, okay, America was founded in 1776, and that actually means that somebody else's way of life came to an end. And that doesn't get honored and recognized. So a horrible situation, right? It leads to the first treaty. So we think we're making progress. Fort Laramie Treaty was signed in 1851. Protected land that the United States government vowed not to touch. We're not going to touch this. We're not going to have control over this. This will be sovereign. And it was a lot of space. Hey, sorry we invaded you, but let's coexist, blah, blah, blah. Right? So it seemed that there were some at the time in the U.S. government that realized the ideals of the institution of the United States of America, like what we were founded on, needed to be applied in this case, which was obviously probably the minority voice, but that happened. A few years later, 1868, Fort Laramie Treaty was revisited, and it actually expanded the treaty lands. And so it appeared things were moving in the right direction. There had been a lot of conversations between the sides, and, education was happening. So this was one of the very last times for a long time that anything went in favor of the Native Americans. 1871, Congress passes a law prohibiting future treaties with Native Americans. So no more bargaining in good faith. That went out the window in very short order. And then just a few years later, 1974, gold was discovered in the Black Hills. Obviously, that changed everything. Forget the fact that it's a sacred space. We are going to decimate this region for profit. 1876, Battle of Little Bighorn, where Lakota and Cheyenne tribes took down Custer's army. Of course, at the time, there's this very slow-going media. Of course, they can tell the story that they want to tell, right? So it stirred that pot of other, quote, Americans not understanding what was happening, believing now that they're under threat by Native, just not understanding the context of that battle and what it portrayed. And, it's just really, really, really sad. Not recognizing that the government was deploying all these tactics to destroy the culture, to destroy the spirit of the people. And quite honestly, it was complete genocide. This is what they were attempting under the form of legal, whatever, war tactics, maneuvers, blah, blah, blah. It's just horrible. I don't know. I shake my head a lot at this because it's like you read these words and it really happened. This isn't a work of fiction. This isn't a movie, or a documentary. Like this actually happened, and it's so not well known and well understood. Agreement of 1877 took most of the treaty land that had been given away, took it away, permanently established reservations that were very far away from sacred sites. So we're just against going in the wrong direction. 1878, first boarding school was established to, quote, kill the Indian and save the man. End quote. They forced Native children away from their families, punishing them for speaking their language or practicing their culture, cut their hair, destroyed their identity. And your mother was at a boarding school for how many years?
Oh, in our early years when they were still on Pine Ridge Reservation, and then they moved away so that they could attend schools in Rapid City as best they could at that time.
Okay. So was she at the old Susan site at that school, or were they different facilities for her?
I believe she was at where the Rapid City, the old building where the school is now.
Okay.
So she was able to walk there from Indian camp because, as you recall, the tribal members had to live in Indian camp because we couldn't live in housing yet at that time. So Indian camp, Oshkosh Indian camp, was where tribal members would live in kind of a refugee style camp and along Rapid Creek. And then that's where the kids could walk to school, and then the work available was in the kitchens or in the lumber yards. So that's where they left Pine Ridge, and Mom left the boarding school to go to that environment in Oshkosh Indian Camp so that her dad could find work after coming back home from World War II, as well as hoping to get a better education for all the kids, including Mom.
So there were no even veteran privileges back then for the families of people who served in our wars to at least give them a better life. That wasn't a thing.
Not for Natives in this case. Again, at that time frame in the 40s, it was still very segregated. And so a lot of folks that served that were from tribal nations, as well as other minority groups that served, did not get equal veteran services until later, when some of those federal acts were enacted in the 70s, for instance.
You know, that really brings up an interesting timeline. Let me scroll to this piece. 1920, just to put it in perspective, in 1920, women in the United States won the right to vote. Okay. In 1924, there was the American Indian Citizenship Act, which granted Native Americans the right to be citizens of the United States, but they still could not vote. 1951, they were granted the right to vote in South Dakota. I mean, my parents were born just a few years after this. This is not that long ago. And then 1965, Native Americans were granted the right to vote in the United States. And it wasn't until the year before I was born. I'm going to cry again. This stuff makes me so mad. But that Native Americans were granted the right to teach and speak their language to their children. Yeah. What the hell is wrong with this picture? But anyway, I just hope that people can hear this and understand, if this were happening to you in your culture, where it's illegal to speak your language, it's illegal to practice your beliefs, your religion, your spirituality, to raise your children the way you want to, you would be destroyed. Yeah. Your spirit and just the endurance and, again, the story. So I would love for you, Jim, to talk about some of the things your mom experienced and that resilience and those lessons learned. And, it could go one of two ways. And, when I was writing that letter for her for the Spirit of Dakota Award, which she did win, which was amazing. But, in talking about you can go one of two ways, right? Where you endure a lot of hardship and trauma and just horror, and you can be mean and angry and bitter and hate people over it. Or you can be a light and you can educate and you can try to help people avoid making those same types of mistakes in the future. And your mom was definitely an example of the latter. So can you please, I don't want to hear myself talk anymore, talk about your amazing mother and then, and how it spurred the work that you do.
Well, growing up with Mom, obviously we knew who we were, my brother Don and I, and we followed in her footsteps in terms of being advocates for our tribal members, not only our tribe, but all Indigenous people in America. Because as a result of segregation in Rapid City, Mom and Dad couldn't rent a home in Rapid City after they got married in 1962. So they were decided to move to Arizona, where segregation wasn't as impactful towards Indian people as it was in Rapid still during that time. So that's why I grew up in Arizona as a result of that reality that my parents faced after they got married, with still that segregative perspective. And, you know, as Mom would say, they still don't know us, that she learned from her dad. And that's a story she tells quite often. And I still think of her as being here because she's still, you know, teaching. I just utilize her memory and I share the story. So as that conduit, I can share some of these experiences that she had as an 8-year-old leaving Oshkosh Indian Camp to go to the city for the first time. So she was very excited to go to the city and experience, you know, just a world that she's never seen before. So when they walked, as she recalls, holding her dad's hand and walking through the sidewalks and seeing all these stores and restaurants and streets and curbs even, you know, the whole bit that she didn't experience growing up on Pine Ridge. And at that time, she always said that the storefronts were at a low level, as we know they are in terms of, you know, having their store windows to advertise the products they're selling. And they came upon her first "No Indians Allowed" sign. And that obviously was quite impactful for her. And she stopped short, and her dad, Grandpa, you know, would look down and say, what? You know, and she, Duck Way, why? Aren't we allowed in here? And she always described it so eloquently from her training as a health professional and a nurse, that she had those concepts of knowing who she is as a Lakota, but also knowing at that age that that was not right, that there was something wrong with that statement of exclusion and segregation. And she always said, when she asked why, her dad very eloquently at the time said, because they don't know us. And then she would say, here we are 75 years later, and you still don't know us today. And those are some of the challenges and frustrations that I know many of us have as Indigenous people of America, working, trying to make things better for our people. And there's so many challenges back home. I reside in San Diego, California, where I got my master's degree at San Diego State University, the other SDSU, I like to say, because my mom worked at SDSU, South Dakota State University. So that was a connection, obviously, in terms of the acronyms, but also the impact that Mom had on us in terms of our studies. And I went in the direction of disability, addressing some of the core issues of the public health disparities and funding of Indian Health Service and availability of quality health care that impacts the epidemic level of disabilities that we have, not only physical, but emotional and mental disabilities, you know, technically, that are out there in Indian country. So that's why I work at the various centers for disabilities throughout the country, including University of South Dakota. I'm there part-time, where I created the Oyate Circle, which is a disability sub-center that focuses on disability services that is coming from an indigenized approach, similar to what Mom did with her nursing education center in Anak, that has been very successful because of her indigenized approach, not only to nursing, but academia and the application of culture within the curriculum. So I know that her students, her mentees, benefited greatly having that core belief and confidence in who they are, although the surrounding environment doesn't necessarily respect who we are. And that's, again, another challenge that many of our young ones face, is they're being trained to know the language, to know and be proud of who they are as Lakota, as well as other tribes throughout the nation. Yet many of the academic institutions, as well as obviously society in general, still doesn't know who we are. So that's a responsibility multi-generationally when we think of the seventh generation philosophy that we were taught. And Mom made sure we knew that we had a responsibility 7 generations behind, as well as 7 generations ahead. And what a wonderful responsibility to have that all of us as two-leggeds, as human beings, share. If we have that philosophy, then the core balance of the decisions that we make is not only representing our family and people in a good way 7 generations ago, but also thinking of those generations that we'll never see in this lifetime. And that's what Mom represented, and she's doing it, even though, as we know, she just made her journey, and it's so sad not having her here, but she's still making the impact for those generations that she won't see ahead with that philosophy of 7 generations. So when you think of the trauma and some of those elements that my mom went through personally, where she, literally said they didn't beat it out of her at Pine Ridge Indian boarding school. Her favorite time was when they were in the fields in the afternoon, learning how to be farmers and such. But that was where they could quietly speak Lakota and keep their ways without getting beaten and punished in the classroom for doing so. So that allowed her to keep her, foundation of who she is through language. So think of the resiliency and, as you said, imagine if there was a government that said no longer will we speak English in America.
Mm-hmm.
We will now speak Russian or Chinese or whatever language you want to throw out there, but non-English. And that would be obviously a major impact to all of the families in America where their primary language is English, particularly here in this area where, they're trying to do English only in academia, but we kind of chuckle at that as sovereign nations saying, no, we're going to still apply our languages. So there's still about 200 languages left today out of the 500 plus nations that are recognized and the over 700 nations that were here prior to European contact. And in my belief system, I firmly believe that I will save 100 of those languages, and Lakota will be one of those because of the efforts that Mom made that's going through my generation and what I'm sharing with my son and my takojas, my grandkids, and having that lens as a grandparent sure changes your perspective. And as we know, as grandparents, our journey is closer. So when I join Mom with the ancestors, I want to look back and know that whatever I did through her teachings, as well as the indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing that she shared not only with us as children, my brother and I, but with her students and others in the community. And again, that goes to the generational impact to make up for those multi-generations of trauma, going through the boarding schools, going through the genocide, because when people think of genocide and Holocaust, they think of the European genocide and Holocaust, because that's well taught in American curriculum, but we don't apply those terminologies to what happened here in America. And when you look at that 400-year period of war, when we were in the Department of War with what is now the United States, that 400 years was a hard fight to keep our traditional lands. And that 400 years is where we now have 4% of the land left. But unfortunately, 90% of us in population perished as a result of European contact. And that's obviously another heavy dynamic, if you will, in terms of the multi-generational trauma. And lastly, I'll share is when I go home, I go to Wounded Knee to visit family members.
Yes.
They're number 18 on that gravestone of families that perished that day at Wounded Knee. And so most Americans don't have to have that experience of visiting a mass grave of 300 people, knowing that 3 of their family members are in that mass grave. But I do so as my mom taught us to ensure that they're never forgotten and that their deaths were not in vain, that we will remember them and honor their legacy and what price they had to pay so that we are here today to do what we are supposed to do and responsible for those generations, not only ours, but all our non-Indian generations as well. So I'm hoping that will happen for my Takojas. I have unfortunately resigned that I will not see it in my lifetime, but maybe my son will, but for sure my grandkids will. I have that hope that my mom would always share, even in the face of high adversity, there's ways of still moving forward and getting around some of those barriers and individuals that just don't see it. So that intergenerational trauma, as you said, is proven in medical, journals as well as studies. So that's why there is some mental health challenges and some of those traumatic events that still impact us today. Fortunately, I'm able to manifest that trauma in a good way through my work, not only in academia, but films, so I can share our stories with an Indigenous lens through film and curriculum development. So,
well, we want to hear, we want to hear more about the film. But I do just want to add for a moment that one of the things I remember learning, it was like at a Lunch and Learn, and I think your mom was one of the hosts of the Lunch and Learn, but they were talking about an entire generation, and in some cases a couple of generations, who because of the boarding schools, they didn't really have parents. And so they were never modeled parenting. And then as they grew up and, their lives changed, they became parents, but they had never really been with parents. They were not children who were parented. And the struggles that caused, that was really eye-opening for me in that moment. And it was just something that really stuck out is, we do learn from those around us. And a lot of us learn really great things. But if you don't have those people in your life, it can be completely different. And I don't know how you teach what you never learned to begin with. So, that was really a lesson for me for sure. And it's been several years since I attended that event, but it was definitely educational and informational and heartbreaking all at the same time. Can you talk more? You talked about seven generations. Can you talk more about your documentary work around that idea?
Yeah, again, addressing some of those traumatic events that you just discussed is something that provides unfortunate, foundation to some of the challenges that we're facing today in Indian country. And as an academic and working in the world of disability and public health disparities, I want to provide teachings, and I can't help but teach through my work in academia, but it now applies to my work as a filmmaker, as a producer, and now director. It's wonderful to be able to have control of the narrative and the lens coming from an Indigenous perspective versus in the perspective of someone trying to understand it, but doesn't have that DNA connection with that trauma and that experience of life and that lens that we have as Indigenous people. And that leads to some of the frustrations in academia where they're not teaching this information, and where my films, often some of the reviews I get on Amazon Prime and other platforms when people see my film is, why don't I know this? And that's by design, in my opinion. And it's frustrating as an academic that what they're getting away with in teaching the history of Indigenous people here in America, where the myth of Columbus still discovering what we now call America when he never stepped foot in what is now America.
Right.
Many people don't even know that basic fact, that Columbus never stepped foot in America.
Yeah, he failed.
So, yes, he was lost.
He didn't know where he was. Yeah.
So being lost in the Caribbean now is the West Indies, because after discovering he was not in India, he decided to go, well, now you're West India. So again, it's just, based on ignorance by design. And it's something that, unfortunately, when I teach internationally, Americans and Americans just don't know the story. But when we teach internationally in Europe and Asia, many times they'll know more about the history than American students do. So when I teach the international students, I always am, curious on the amount that they know as compared to American students. And again, by design through curriculum, so that we don't know this as citizens, and then we don't learn it until after our school when we experience mediums like film or higher education, if folks go to college and take some of the courses that are taught by us as Native individuals. But I personally work for a multitude of universities throughout the nation, and what's happening with many Board of Regents throughout the nation is some of the state Board of Regents are trying to eliminate historical teachings. They don't want to know about genocide and some of those Holocaust comparatives. So that's a frustrating reality of what I'm living through as a grandparent and an educator, that there's still pushback from many institutions that would prefer not to teach that reality of what happened to Indigenous people in America. And I feel if we finally get there and teach it, we can move forward instead of what they've been trying to do and saying, hey, just move on, forget about it. Why is it such a big deal? Well, it continues to be a big deal because of the lack of awareness that, mom would do effectively in teaching various organizations from different colleges and universities to police departments to One Heart campus.
Yeah.
She was everywhere in her impact. And again, I wish mom could be cloned so we have more of her.
Oh, God.
And, that would be awesome. But all we can do now, as I say, collectively, the people that she impacted, we continue her message. And hopefully those other generations that we impact will have that instilled in them as they grow into adults and make their footprints in future generations.
So, Jim, I'm curious with regard to, I know when I met you, you were really getting involved on the international film scene, and your documentaries were being incredibly well received. You were winning awards. Like you said, the awareness was so much more accepted, appreciated, even understood. How have you attempted to really spread the documentaries across the United States? Have you been met with resistance, or is it just that there aren't that many film festivals here, or like is there a larger strategy at work here, and have you been running into any barriers with that?
Well, I've learned as I've gone along because, as I developed my production company, because I thought I had retired from academia when I retired from San Diego State
You're starting
University.
to sound like your mom. It's happened.
Yes, exactly. I was going to go, you know what? It's time to make a change from academia after 22 years at San Diego State. It was a wonderful experience on creating academic programs for tribal folks throughout the country, and allowed me to work with a multitude of tribal nations and learn the diversity of Indian country and all the perspectives of the various Indigenous lenses that I got to learn from. So that brought a wealth of information to me in my teaching so that we don't homogenize Indian country.
Yeah, that's super important too. Right.
Yes. Yeah, because American curriculum, again, goes, there's only one way, Indian way, and that's just not so more school districts, depending on the location, their willingness to teach some of this. For instance, here in San Diego, my grandson, my little Takojas are going to school in Ocean Beach area. And each of the students in CJ's class, in his 5th grade class, each get a different tribal nation throughout the United States to present as their project.
Wow.
So even my little Takoja with 3 different tribal nations in his little world is now expanding to learn some other of the tribal nations. And I wish that was more accepted in, some of the states that are resisting this type of education. But that's another benefit, I guess, of having my grandkids grow up here. other than other areas where they don't get that benefit of that inclusive and, truthful storytelling of the Indigenous experience in America. So we're still there academically, and I'm glad I was pulled back in by University of South Dakota Center for Disabilities, where my work honors my father, who had MS, multiple sclerosis, for 37 years. And when he was diagnosed, he was given maybe 10 years to live, but he lived with MS for 37 years, I like to say. And the strongest man I know happened to use a wheelchair. And I know a lot of his strength came through mom as well, and her skill as a healthcare provider and ability to provide that environment in home so he could stay home and continue to work. And, those are the type of things I grew up with. My brother and I, as positive examples of, we need to continue their work somehow. So I'm very fortunate I can represent my parents and the work that they do, not only as an academic, but as a filmmaker and an advocate.
For sure. Well, I don't know if this will make you feel just a little bit better about traditional American education, Jim, but I was a fifth grader during the Year of Reconciliation here in South Dakota. And my teachers in little old Deadwood, South Dakota, we actually did there were different units throughout the year, but we learned a tremendous amount at that time about Lakota culture. And it
Wonderful.
it was really, and my best friend still lives in this area, and she and I will talk about it sometime, just how lucky we were that we had the teachers we had, because they really embraced it. And I remember they brought in a special guest to show us how teepees were erected and to recognize how it was not easy. It was kind of a struggle, but they would, they did it.
There's science to it, yeah.
Yeah, they did it, from place to place to place. And it was probably this amazing, they were experts at it, of course, but it was really neat. Now, I don't remember there being a huge focus on the U.S. government's role in how things played out for the Indigenous people in this area, but it was talked about. But I think there was a lot of just the beauty of the culture that was part of our academics at that time. And I am 44 years old, and I still remember some of it. So it did make an impression, and I suspect some of my classmates still remember it well too. So educators have a huge responsibility, and
yes, they do.
And your mom was a nurse, but she was
an educator.
An educator in all the ways. For sure. So maybe
and
you can
her
take
impact at the. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say maybe you can take just a little bit of joy in knowing that even many years ago, there were some schools where we did try to introduce it, and I think introduce it in the right way and help people understand that, it just was a really unique time in my life, and I still remember it now. So I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Well, I think another little ray of hope, no pun intended, here at One Heart, that's a thing.
We have an actual ray of hope.
We have an actual ray of hope that actually faces the Beverly Warne Cultural Center on our campus. So, but I remember a number of years ago, I was going through some coursework with Dr. Craig Howe on Indigenous Studies, and my son was, I don't know if he was back for college or if he was maybe he hadn't graduated high school yet. And so one morning I said, "Hihani washte," and he said it right back, "Oh, good morning." And I went, "How do you know that?" And he goes, "Oh, we say that at school all the time. Our Native friends have taught us that." And I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, I ran around, a lot of my friends were Native American growing up, and never heard the words except washichu. I mean, that's the only one I knew. Or I can't remember dog. I knew dog at one point. But it was just shunka, that's right. It was just a couple of things. And I'm just like, really? And he's like, yeah. And it just shows that the younger generations these days have such a higher level of awareness that what we were afforded. And, like you said, Jim, it was intentionally, it was by design kept from us, right? And so that gave me hope that it's slow, God, it's slow. That things, however, are changing, and that awareness is growing and spreading. And hopefully a few generations from now, it's just a different world. I really hope that. I really hope that. How do you, in doing the work that you do every day, when you start to see, because your mom and I used to have these conversations all the time where she would get so hopeful and excited, seeing progress, seeing bridges, building more allies, seeing this being productive and effective, and then having some kind of a community-wide setback or something that would, just kind of take the wind out of the sails. How to handle those types of setbacks? And, do you largely feel more hopeful than bummed out with progress? Or, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, and again, that was the foundation, was even though there's such challenges and barriers, there's that light at the end of the tunnel. There's a way, and there has to be a way, and continued efforts to build those bridges, as you said, even with many of those bridges being broken and burned down over the years. And as you mentioned, with your academic experience, you saw the beauty of the culture, but they didn't go into the genocide. And that's where it's hard to teach American history, and that's when they transition to, well, let's discuss the European genocide versus ours. Mm-hmm. Although ours was more successful than the European genocide in terms of percentages and
people?
Numbers. It was millions over the years.
Millions of Indigenous people.
400 years. If you just do 250,000 a year, there's very many numbers out there of estimates of how many people were here prior to European contact. And, most of the academics like to go with the lower number, but there's varying levels of that impact. And how many people actually did disappear as a result of European contact. So those are the difficult realities that are still not being taught. I'm glad that you had the experience of that we were human beings with a beautiful culture.
Well, and
that
I
we
think,
and
to be fair, there was some history taught. So I don't want to throw my teachers under the bus because they were really incredible. There was some of that history taught. However, I think the focus that I remember the most was, learning about how children, like what their toys would have been, what the teepee, what life was like in a tribe. And that's what I took away that's just the things that I remember the most. But I do think they really did. There was a focus on the history of our region, and that's kind of how it was introduced. And then, but a lot of focus on the cultural components that, we can better, I think, we could relate with as probably 10, 11-year-olds. I'm going back a long ways now.
Oh, yeah. And people, again, at that level aren't taught about the Holocaust in Europe yet.
True.
But they are eventually, because as American curriculum, that's always a part of what not to do. But yet they don't go to where what we did in America. And that's a reality of curriculum from my Indigenous perspective. And that's something where somehow we need to tell more of that truth that Mom wanted in it, as we shared that similar frustration with many as academians that, our students don't know this, and we have to teach them. And even our own Native people that rely on American curriculum, they're obviously not going to know who they are unless they get that individual teacher or a separate element outside of curriculum. Because as you said, that's a big responsibility, and either teachers are going to teach the minimum standard or they'll go a little bit extra on particular subject matters. So
do you think it's because they might be uncomfortable with it? Do you think it's...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's that fragility, if you will, of, wow, I wasn't taught this. How am I supposed to, now that I know the truth, teach that, this was genocide? And why don't we use that terminology for the American experience?
That's fair, Holocaust. But it certainly hasn't shut me up. I mean, after learning that and coming to terms with that, it's like, call it what it is. This is what it was. It was genocide. That was an attempt to eradicate Indigenous people from the face of this country. And it's disgusting, and it needs to be named.
Yeah, and that's where, again, if we're taught that and somehow get that as an outcome of at least K through 12, and then if you go to the post-secondary, but having that basic knowledge of knowing who we are, as Grandpa said to Mom, in the 40s.
Yeah.
They don't know who we are.
They don't
And
know us
again, we're
yet.
still dealing by design is that, who we are in terms of, we now see you as a beautiful people, but we can't ingest the fact that America was the beneficiary of genocide. It's hard enough to, for many to, ingest the fact that slave labor was a major component of building the country, let alone having to eradicate. Because to colonize, you either colonize the population or eliminate it. And if you look up colonization, the colonies, and, Amherst, who was the governor of the colonies, the 13 colonies, and their spread of the smallpox pandemic on purpose as a weapon of war. It's all there,
Bioweapon,
but it's not taught. Those aren't things that we teach. We prefer to go to Europe or other countries that teach those horrible aspects. Yet, again, America benefited from those things, and it's not comfortable. It's not easy, but it's fact. And as an Indigenous person, that's where I want more, knowledge to where we're not mascots for a team. I'm always asked that as a former professional athlete, what are my perspectives of the mascots and why is it such a big deal? And that's why I go into the more traumatic root. And when I was asked by Fox Sports, NFL, when they were doing the social justice series after George Floyd and bringing attention to social justice issues, the mascot issue obviously came up during Thanksgiving. So I co-produced a piece with Fox Sports called Oyate Un Itowapi, which means pictures of my people, because they reached out to me seeing my films, wanting to get my perspective and partnership in developing that short film that we did for NFL pregame show on Thanksgiving a few years ago. So we were able to get Emmy nominated, and that has given me an increased platform as a filmmaker to tell these stories. Like my current story, My Native America, I hope it becomes a travel show, because I think an effective travel show showing contemporary Indian country from our lens would be very effective in teaching our society who we are. Similar to other, like Anthony Bourdain, I miss him very much, and I wish he was still out there sharing these cultures through food.
Yeah.
And obviously, I want to go to these nations, and my newest project, My Native America, is now out and will be in Mexico City, in Puebla, just south of Mexico City, for the World Class Film Awards. So I'm sharing that story through the new films. And again, back on Orange Shirt Day, September 30th, for the honoring the kids from the boarding schools, I was able to show my last film, Remember the Children. And that featured Mom when she opened up the movie with that story of her experience going to town for the first time. So again, these films, obviously I'm going to miss having Mom as my star, but I'm still utilizing some of the footage that I have so she can continue to teach in the films that I am still making today. So those 4 nations I go to, I show the beauty of the culture and I identify when I go home to Pine Ridge, I notice and I'm well aware of the poverty and the horrible realities, but I also see that beauty that you referenced in terms of who we are. And I see more of our young ones knowing the language and participating in our ways of knowing and traditional knowledge, as well as doing better in the academics and the American school system, and living in those two worlds as best they can. It's a juggle for all of us that want to remain Lakota or Indigenous at heart, but yet be participants in the American society. It's a juggling act between two distinct cultures that happen to live together. So again, with Mom's message is, how can we make that happen when we still have, some curriculum that doesn't quite get there? When we think of some of the truth of a 90% elimination rate, that's terrible, and obviously millions of people perished as a result of European contact, but the resiliency of who we are and where we are now fortunately, I'm seeing some of that as an elder in training, or maybe I'm an elder, but I'm
You might
seeing
be
that in
getting
our
up there,
young
Jimmy.
ones. I know it. I think I missed the memo, and I'm an elder officially, but what I've learned, losing mom and my wife, lost her dad, so we lost pops over in Hoopa in Northern California, her tribe in Northern California, just having that loss. And then my mentor at San Diego State University left us just recently. And so I come to realize elders don't have elders. And we have to utilize what they taught us to not only continue their teachings, but reflected in what we're doing for those future generations that mom really taught was our responsibility to do so.
Well, I'll tell you, have you ever sundanced?
No, unfortunately, with my heart attack situation, having 3 heart attacks and the 4-way bypass, it's been suggested I don't do so.
Maybe not a good idea. Yeah. Well,
I wish I did it younger, but my brother did. And
did he?
Made that commitment, the 4-year commitment. And so my son and his son and, just our family was able to be there with him and support Don as he made that commitment to Sundance, not only for the family, but all the people, as it's designed to do, is that Sundance is, we will, make that sacrifice for our people and others. So
that's really beautiful.
It's a beautiful way,
Someone I know recently embarked upon their first one. Close to my age, said it's time. And I was so happy and excited for him. And he came back and he shared that experience. And I wanted to share this with you because it gave me so much more, I guess, feeling more connected, particularly in missing your mom.
Yeah.
But, he was talking about as he was going through ceremony and hitting that different state and that different plane of awareness and existence. And he could actually see these orbs in the distance coming closer. And when he realized, because he's starting to have memories from deep in childhood, that these orbs were actually ancestors and people that he knew that had passed on to the next stage. And it just made it feel within reach. Like there was so much power in that experience. And then the fact, that gift that he shared that with me made me think about stories that your mom would tell me, especially like in the early days of One Heart. I mean, you knew like all of we always talk about, Jim, you and I, like people are afraid of that which they don't understand, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you think about, I proposed this big idea here where we're going to park this campus in the middle of the community, and some of our community members lost their minds over it. Like, this is scary. We need to move this to the outskirts of town. I mean, it sounds familiar, right? It's like, same thing that happened with Indigenous people here around the Rapid Creek area. Let's move them north of Rapid. Let's get them out of here. And and this is real, and this is part of that history. And your mom would tell me when things were feeling really rough, and she's just like, you may not see it, but there's so much support for what you're doing and the healing environment that you're creating. And she would talk to me about the ancestors that are like behind me, cheering me on and all that kind of a thing. So then hearing his story and his experience with Sundance, it just kind of brought that more into focus, and it feels more real. It feels like she's still there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and you applying some of that, literally with an EP available on campus, not only for your native clients, but other clientele that have seen the benefits of utilizing that way of balance through the Inipi ceremony and the circular philosophy that the teepee represents, and then the opening at the top leading to the spirit world. And, it wasn't just a structure of housing. There was, there was some meaning to it. And it was so fun for me with going to these 4 tribal nations and seeing their different housing, at Hoopa was completely different, as well as here in Ipe in San Diego. And then the Longhouse people in the 6 Nations when I went to Seneca, and then, of course, our teepees. But the similar aspect of them is that there was a circle in the middle. And that was the core foundation of that balance and inclusion.
Yep.
And how can we be at the center of our circle, our medicine wheel, from a Lakota perspective as best we can, balancing those elements, human elements, so that we can, move forward in a good way. There's always going to be the environmental impact that draws us off balance, either through sadness or anger or whatever we have as a human experience. But what do we utilize with some of the teachings like Mom would provide with those great obstacles and frustrations? And, I just think now of that story she told opening my film. When we did the interview that day, she told that powerful story, and I was glad as a filmmaker that we got it. And I go, this will be, an impactful part of the story. And then the very next day, that hotel owner, banished Native Americans on Facebook. So I said to Mom, man, just yesterday you tell the story 75 years ago of seeing the sign in the window. Now it's in the cloud. Yeah. Literally, less than 24 hours later, that hate continued, banning Indian people from this hotel. Fortunately, the state didn't care much, but fortunately, there's a federal aspect of responsibility, and I guess they had to file bankruptcy or whatever, but those individuals cannot be allowed to operate in today's America. And again, it was just very telling, the need to share Mom's story when that banishment was still happening, just less than 24 hours later, literally in Rapid City.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Still challenges. We're pretty far away from not having any challenges, but you're making some headway, sir, and with your mom looking over your shoulder, probably.
Oh, yes. Always, yeah. I know she has curriculum and she's teaching the ancestors now.
Oh, yes.
She can't help it. And so, again, that spirit continues through her teachings and all of those. She was Unchi grandma. There's so many, and my extended family is wonderful as a result of her impact back home. And I call it home. I've never lived there. I hope to someday, but it is home. And her impact when she moved back after she thought she retired and she flunked retirement, and fortunately, and created that nursing program that's now a model of success for the nation, and other universities are following that model she created in an environment, that was very challenging. So other universities can follow it. So. And accreditation even said, whatever she's doing, do it.
Keep doing it, yeah. And I want to stress too, when you're talking about your mom and all these initiatives she was involved with, and one would think that she was very loud and vocal in getting people's attention that way, and that could not be further from the truth. Quiet, humble. Just so poised.
Oh, yeah.
No matter what was going on. There were some times, she talked me down from the ledge, and I'd be like, why aren't you frustrated? And she would say, I am.
Yeah.
I am frustrated. I'm just not going to say what I'm really thinking right now. And, so there are a lot of lessons learned from her. But how she would do that, I just remember when she drove to Huron for that what was it? The Pioneer Spirit of Dakota Pioneer. Well, I can't remember what it was called now, but it was an award, a recognition for women, and it had to do with pioneer women. And I think she may have been one of the first Native American women nominated, and she was nominated by her nursing friends that she had gone through university with. Her crew, her little amazing group, and I told her, I said, when I wrote that recommendation letter, and I poured my heart into that thing, and I said, I will go with you. I will go with you. And she's like, oh, okay. And then she comes back, and I hear through the grapevine that she's won it. And I called her. I'm like, Bev. And she goes, well, they were just such the amazing, accomplished women. I didn't think I would stand a chance, and I didn't want to make a big deal of it. So she went all that way by herself, sat through this thing, was completely shocked that she won it, got up, didn't have anything prepared because she didn't think she stood a chance. And I wanted to be there for her for that. And, she knew that, but she's just not going to ask for recognition.
No.
For any accolades. And I know when, we were preparing for her service, all of the accolades. Do you remember, Jimmy, the tables of things that the recognition that she's received and never sought? And it's just such a testament to that quiet, determined, resilient will that she had to make things better for Native American nursing students and pretty much everyone else she came into contact with.
Yeah.
It was just remarkable. And so I'm just so grateful for her and so grateful that she shared you with me because, I don't even know how many years it's been now, but a lot. And I wouldn't have it any other way. So I'm glad to know you. I do have one fun kind of question because I know this shocked me when going through some of that coursework I was talking about. So do you remember exactly what you were doing in 1990 when Native Americans were granted the right to speak their language in this country? Do you remember where you were at?
I was still in bouncing around professional football.
Okay.
So I think I wore out my welcome in the NFL, and I was starting my career in NFL Europe at the time, I believe. So.
Oh, I didn't know about the Europe thing.
Oh yeah. I played in 3 different professional football leagues. So they say professional journeyman. I like to say I was a refugee because I continued moving around different football leagues. And obviously NFL, I was bounced around 4 teams in a 2-year span after I was drafted by Cincinnati in '87. And so I was in between. I was kind of thought that in 1990 my football career is over. And that's when I started graduate school. And then I took time for sabbatical when I was drafted by NFL Europe, the World League at the time. So then what year did the stuntman adventure come into play?
This is news to me.
Or was retired from football in '92, I guess. So my last year was in arena football, the indoor football league. And then New York, I played out there. And that was a summer job during graduate school. So that was kind of fun. And then the NFL Europe World League was, I took a semester off, and that allowed me some extra money to help pay for my graduate degree. And my parents obviously were supporting me because they, in between after football, I kind of got into the bodyguard security work, and my parents didn't want me doing that and always encouraged me to go to graduate school. And, finally I asked for the help to go, and they helped me. And then I got an offer to do some stunt work. I had a few small parts and then got a big part in the movie The Substitute with Tom Berenger. And my first film award actually was the fight scene of the month on Cinemax in 1996, I believe. I don't know.
I mean, not many people can claim something like that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was living my dream because as a young man, I wanted to be like Jim Brown or Fred Dryer, Alex Ayers, having these great football careers and then moving into Hollywood as an actor and doing that stuff. So, and then I had the physicality to be a stuntman, so I got a lot of roles as an actor/stuntman. So I got double checks because I got stuntman check as well as actor check.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. So
sign me up for double checks.
I actually got, back then it was the Hollywood stereotype of Indian people, the Hollywood Indian, that's what they wanted me to portray. And I, being trained as I was, I just couldn't do it. I'm not that good of an actor, and I just can't portray us in what Hollywood wants us to be. So I was fired by Adam Sandler on one of the movie sets that I refused to sound more foreign, as he asked me to. He goes, "Jim, I need you to sound more foreign." And what he wanted was the Hollywood stereotype. So he completely changed the script for the bold Indian role. And I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad he fired me and actually motivated me to get behind the camera, because I just quit acting and stunts at the time. And well, I may get back into acting now as an elder, and obviously I can't do stunts anymore. I'm too old and delicate for that. But, maybe with some of the wonderful roles that are available, because more of us are behind the camera, and I'm doing my small part as an educator and documentarian to again, be part of that movement of more of us getting behind the camera. And I've always said for years in the world of media, and once a sitcom about us is out there and popular where they're laughing with us versus at us, then we're in. And that was Res Dogs.
I was going to just ask.
Smaller degree, Rutherford Falls and some of these others that have Native people behind the camera. And again, we're going through that transition where people are claiming to be Native, and pardon me, but we're going through that transition where in entertainment as well as academia, many people are claiming to be tribal members and aren't really. And so again, that portrayal sometimes is compromised in Hollywood as well as academia with individuals that claim it but don't live it through the DNA and life experience. So those are some of those, I'm so glad I got to live my dream in a small fashion, but so much more so with the training as an advocate. And I became an educator when that wasn't in my young years of thinking that I would be working in the university systems and teaching with my young goals of being a football and Hollywood star. So I'm glad it was a short career in both, and allowed me to, get into higher education and utilize that platform to establish a career and raise a family. And still now, as it's wonderful to get back into film behind the camera and tell the stories, and the platform I've established in the world of documentaries has been really fun, because all my films are used as curriculum at various universities throughout the country, as well as
at One Heart.
Yes,
also
exactly.
At One Heart.
So again, with the films I've been making, and the film, my last film, Remember the Children, that we screened on Orange Shirt Day, September 30, and then upcoming showcasing my film and not only in America but throughout the world with film festivals, and hopefully gaining an opportunity to put it on a network and ultimately get funding to do the actual show, where I'm res hopping and telling the stories of various tribal nations throughout the country. Would be a wonderful dream. I would like to come true, obviously. So
yeah,
who knows?
Awesome.
Stay tuned, as they say in the biz.
Well, keep at it. I mean, you're a great advocate. You kind of broke the mold as far as like promotion and things like that. You're not afraid to do that. You're not afraid to stand up and speak up and share and teach. I'm very positive you got that from your mother.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I just keep doing what you're doing. Let us know, of course, always how we can help you. And we're just so grateful that you came on with us today to share some of this. And I'm sure we'll have you back.
Yeah, well, I'll do a little bit of promotion. Go to gen7films.com and you can see where some of the films will be screening. It just world premiered at the Colorado River Indian Tribes last month, and looking forward to having some more of these premieres. And of course, in Mexico next month will be a great experience as well. So gen7films.com, check it out.
Whoop, whoop.
All
right.
awesome.
And we'll put a link to that in our show notes too. If you guys didn't catch that, we'll make sure it's on there. So again, thanks, Jim. I'm just proud to know you, proud of the work that you do, and I can't wait to see what's next. So,
well, as Mom would expect, let's keep moving forward together. So
absolutely,
let's do this.
Let's do it.
I really appreciate this. So.
Our pleasure.
All right, Escape Pod listeners, speaking of websites, you can check us out at escapepod.live. Follow us on our socials. Reach out at justbecause@escapepod.live or share your story of escape. That email address is escapeartist@escapepod.live.
Right. So if you're a listener out there that understands firsthand historical trauma, we would love to hear those stories and how you're coping with that and enduring that and overcoming that. I mean, I think that can be a real beautiful source of inspiration for other people who are still trying to navigate that life and what that means and trying to turn it into something positive. I think it could help a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Charity, if I may, just one more comment as we close is that trauma is really impactful in our communities in regards to suicide.
It is.
So remember, there's organizations and people out there that want to help, and you don't have to go through with some of those frustrations that are leading you to those thoughts. So remember, there's people out there that want you to be with us and help you with that trauma. We understand and want you to have that opportunity to succeed and live a good life. So again, it's very impactful and overly represented in our communities, the impact of suicide. So
it is. I actually had some of those notes on here that suicide rate for Native youth is 2.5 times higher than the overall national average. It is very, it's just sad. It's so
it's
sad.
a waste of such talent and future generational impact.
Yes.
So we got to do something collectively, once again, as Mom would say, to address that. And that's trauma based. So
yeah,
let's see what we can do together, as I said, to impact that.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you for the reminder, sir, that, nobody needs to live in pain alone. So reach out if you need it. We are closing the hatch on this episode of The Escape Pod. Remember, trauma may be inevitable, but how you grapple with it is optional.
So remember, please try to stay resilient.
And keep laughing.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jim, for coming on. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.